listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode 108 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is James Barkell. James is the owner of the Coach Doctor, a consultancy group working in all aspects of coaching, from program design, skill acquisition, SNC, leadership, and more. He has a master's in sports coaching, a World Rugby Level 4, and a PhD, where he studied high performance rugby. James is also a lecturer at the University of Sydney and runs the Coach Doctor podcast, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, James.
Thanks, Andy. Pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you inviting me on and having a look at some of your other guests. There's some pretty esteemed guests that you've had in the past, so hopefully I sort of live up to the expectation in some way, shape, and form.
Well, I've been digging around in some of the stuff you've written about and published, and I'm sure you're going to provide like an awesome interview for coaches, especially in a couple of the articles you wrote and about your observations of Ted Lasso. But we'll get into that a little later on. What about you with rugby? How did you first get into rugby, and what were some of those first experiences and really those first coaches that maybe you can remember and reflect on, and how they made an impact on you?
Yeah, mate, I started playing at around the age of 5 years old down at my club in Sydney in Rose Bay called the Bays. Back then, my dad was my first ever coach. So I guess he sort of shaped a lot of what I've done and my love for rugby. So he sort of coached me through till about the age of 11. And he's always been like a massive supporter. I think he's been to almost every game I've played. When I started coaching, he sort of tried to come along and be at every game I've coached. So he's been awesome. a big part of my rugby life, and I guess really installed that love of rugby for me. Then I think about the age of 11 or 12, I started playing for the East Wallaroos, and another coach I had then was a guy called Phil Outerside, and he was the son of Bob Outerside, who was a former Wallaby, who's only just recently passed away. And again, Phil was a great coach, a great personality. I'm not in contact with him anymore, but I'd love to reach out to him at some stage and try and get in contact and let him know how much I appreciated his coaching. Again, just a really good connector with us as kids, in terms of developing great relationships, and he had nicknames for us all, and training was always fun. It wasn't so much about winning and about success; it was more about having a really good time. So again, he's another guy that really stands out to me. And then a coach at school, obviously going into rugby at school in Sydney, GPS competition. I went to a school called Sydney Grammar School, which isn't really known for its rugby, but I had a great coach called Rob Ferrugia for a number of years while I was at school. And look, I was probably not one of the best behaved students at my school, and so he did well to put up. He did well to put up with me for a number of years. But again, he stands out to me as a coach that I had, that I sort of look up to, and again shaped some of my passion and love for the game. And despite my sort of, I guess, issues and behaviors, he just was always patient with me, and he sort of followed my age group through the years, most of the way through. And one of the things about my school is, if we look at them now, they're not even competing in the first 15 program, in the first 15 competition. But back then when I was at school, we were probably the last grammar team to ever have a positive record against St. Joseph's, or Joey's as it's commonly known in Sydney. And are you familiar with the Sydney school system?
Yeah, vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I was probably the last grammar boy. I'm not sure. There might be teams since that went through with a pretty positive record over Joey's. I think we won 3, lost 2, and drew 1 in my 6 years at school, which was pretty good and pretty amazing result for grammar back then. So I guess those 3 guys were probably some of the coaches that I have a lot of fond memories of. As I said, my dad, Phil Outerside, and Rob Ferrugia, all very different styles of coaches, but all loved the game and showed a lot of commitment to us as kids back then. And I guess, very supportive and connected coaches, which is really important.
Yeah. And what you didn't mention was their technical and tactical knowledge. It's more about relationships and how they made you feel and how they treated you.
Yeah, 100%. Like the technical and tactical stuff. Look, I can't, to be 100% honest, I can't remember the difference between all the different coaches I've had over the years, and some have probably been very good technically and tactically, but it's those things that I remember, like the connections that stand out, and it's really important. And there's so much research and that goes back into what makes a good coach, and it keeps coming up time and time again. It's that connection, it's that ability to communicate, and develop the relationships with your athletes. So so I guess that's really, again, shaped the way I look at things, and I'll give you a really good example of Rob Ferrugia. And I don't know if he's ever going to listen, but I'm following him on LinkedIn, so I'm going to tag him in.
Flick him a link to this.
Flick the link. As a year, I can't remember if I was year 11 or year 12, but I had this move that I'd made up, or that I'd actually seen it watching in 1986. I think it was 5 Nations game back then, France versus England, and there was a flanker from France called Eric Champ, who was, an abrasive running back rower that was, I think he was a big character of the game back then, especially for France. And his surname was, spelt Champ, basically.
Yeah.
So, I really sort of gravitated towards this Eric Champ and thought, this guy's a great player. And it was, this was into the late night or the early 90s when so the games that I remember him from were, I used to watch a lot of rugby recordings from, I think my dad used to record the games and I'd watch them back years and years later. Anyway, so I had this move that I saw Eric Champ do one day, and I said to Mr. Ferrugia at the time, I've got this great move. I think it's going to be really, really good. We need to try it. And, most coaches would probably say, look, mate, I'm the coach.
Yeah.
You know your place as part of, one of the members of the team. I'll come up with all the plays. Anyway, again, back in, I think it was year 11 or year 12, and he gave me complete control of implementing this move into the team. And, back then, I think that was about 1993, 94, to have a school teacher coach to, I guess, have the trust in the players to provide
Pretty
some
rare.
of their input. And I think it would be pretty rare. And I know it's something that is probably more commonly looked at or done these days, but, and I won't ever forget that. That was, the fact that he had trust in me. And as I said, I wasn't the best behaved kid at school, far from it. But the fact that he showed some faith that, let's go on, let's try it. Let's do something that you've come up with, is, I guess, a testament to, to his coaching or teaching style. So
that's great.
Those sorts
That's
of memories
awesome.
are the things that I can remember back from when I was playing.
And how'd the move go? Try under the black dot?
Mate, it was a great move. It required a good solid scrum base, and it required everything to go well. And look, I think we tried it once or twice, and maybe we dropped the ball. But the fact is, we tried it.
Yeah,
and look, I saw the All Blacks do an almost carbon copy of it in I think it was the early 2000s. And I thought, that's that same. It was like a double switch off the back of the scrum. It was just a really good deceptive move. That, I think it required a lot of skill. To perform a lot of things.
Something
to
good,
go well.
Good for coaches to think about too. I went on a bit of a kind of 80s Grand Slam Wallabies binge during COVID, and I would just in terms of like the offloading and the support lines and the first phase backs plays from that Wallabies group were just outrageous. It was ridiculous
Yeah.
what they were doing, and it's worth checking out. Like the game was slower, there was more time and space, but there's still elements there that are really, really transferable to today for sure.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much you can learn from looking back at those videos. And like you said, there's so many things that have changed in the game, but there's still a lot that we can learn and we can utilize that I think has been forgotten.
Agreed.
There was another move or another set piece that the Welsh side used, and I think this was back in the late 70s. But again, going back and watching old footage, I saw this move. I thought, right, I'm going to use this. Nobody's ever seen this before. We'll have a go. and like a lot of the time, it's trying to get the players or the athletes to buy into it as well, which is which is half the battle as well. But there's so much that we can learn from the past that and develop it and maybe modify it or change it in a way that's going to be successful in today's modern game. I think it's great.
Yeah, for sure. And what about you as a coach? When did you first realize that coaching's something that you're into and that you might stick it out with, and what were those kind of first experiences like?
Mate, so basically after I finished school, I went and started a PE degree, and while I was doing that, my mum was a teacher and she got me down to her school, which wasn't far from home, and I went down and started coaching under sixes down there while I was doing my PE degree. And then I'd sort of take a couple, move on to doing some older age groups every now and then, under 11s and under 12s and those sorts of things. So I guess that was my first opportunity to coach, and pretty raw back then. But again, I guess the one thing that was important to me was the fun and the enjoyment. So I wasn't very technical as a coach, especially in those that under six sort of level. It was all about just running and tackling and having fun, a lot of ball rush and stuff like that. So I can't really comment too much on my coaching ability back then, but I guess the main focus for me was the enjoyment side, and I actually coached. I think one of the most senior teams I coached in that era was a senior girls hockey team at the same school, and
that's field hockey again, for our Canadian listeners.
Yeah, field hockey, not ice hockey. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that because it was a game I wasn't familiar with, but it gave me an opportunity to come in and I guess try some theories from rugby in a completely different sport. And so that was really, really enjoyable. And to this day, that experience coaching hockey has given me a love for hockey. And I watched plenty of hockey during the Olympics and stuff like that. So, but I guess the main rugby coaching started for me soon after I finished playing. I missed the game. I finished playing probably a little bit early due to injuries. I'd had a number of shoulder injuries, and I think I can remember ringing my parents on Mother's Day. I couldn't go to Mother's Day lunch because I dislocated my shoulder playing a game of rugby league in, I think it was 2004 or 2005. And anyway, ended up saying, look, I'm in the hospital. If you guys can come and pick me up, that'd be great. And I think after that, that was a trial game at the beginning of the season playing league. And following that, I ended up staying with the club, and I basically jumped into a trainer role. So I was working with our A grade side as a trainer. And then I started coaching some of the under sixes. And then that sort of developed, obviously not playing anymore. I sort of really missed that opportunity, the friendships that being involved in rugby or any sport has. I missed I'm a very competitive person by nature, so I really missed the competition and the opportunity. I remember again as a kid doing the stats for my team and being really into all that sort of stuff, and getting upset when our for and against was wasn't as good as it usually was. And I think I had graphs that said, if we win by this much, eventually we'll be, for and against will be, plus 100 or something. And then there was one week I think we lost or something, and I was like, oh god, now we're off. We're not sitting on the right point in the graph that we're meant to be anyway. So yeah, I missed that competition, and look, I was trained as a PE teacher, so I guess it was that logical step.
Yeah.
And I guess rather than being the armchair critic that had all these beliefs that the Wallabies should be doing this or the Waratahs should be doing this, I thought I could add more value as a coach. And my first senior coaching experience was with the University of Sydney fifth grade side, which was a team of guys that had either done their time at first grade and were just looking to play a bit more socially. Some Colts that couldn't make the top three Colts teams at Sydney Uni because it's pretty competitive there. So we had some really old guys, some really young guys, and then we'd have a mixture of guys from that were travelling and in Australia for 1 year, studying at uni and stuff like that had maybe never played rugby but wanted to get involved, and that was their opportunity to develop friendships and relationships. So that was a really, I guess, exciting experience or interesting experience because it was such a diverse playing group. You had Colts that were desperate to try and get into first grade Colts Sydney Uni. You had guys that had done played 200, 300 games for the club and were just happy turning up to training, playing their game, and then the most important thing was how many cans of beer they drink after the game. And then you'd have all these, you'd have French guys, American guys, Japanese guys that would come down and play. And, it was it was the opportunity for them to immerse themselves in I guess, university culture and Australian culture. So, so it was really, really interesting and really diverse group that you had to really, for any of the teachers out there, the differentiation in coaching, like we said, we'd utilize some of those senior players to help out with, the lineouts or the attack, and you'd have to really go down to the basics of the game for some of these new guys that had never played before. And then you also had to manage the expectations of these young guys that were, desperate to try and play at a top level. So, so that's where I sort of all started for me back at Sydney Uni back in 2007 was my first year coaching senior rugby.
Yeah, I think those kind of environments too are great for a new coach in that there's no pressure. Like of course there is some pressure, but there's not a huge. You're not coaching the first grade team. You're basically sounds like you're coaching 3 teams in one there. So you've got to you're like it's like you're spinning plates a little bit and trying to keep one up spinning while going over the other to keep it spinning a bit faster. But at the same time, no one's really there for clipboard judging you. You're not getting anything written up about you or anything like that. You're free to experiment and make a bunch of mistakes and then reflect on them and get better as a coach. So those environments are great.
100%. And I'd say back then, and there would have been a lot of mistakes in my coaching. I think if I'd go back and look at myself then and compare to now, I'd hope that my coaching has improved a lot over the years.
No
but
doubt.
it was a great I guess entry into coaching. And I look back, and I guess it's still the case. But for any of the listeners that aren't aware, Sydney University in Australia is probably one of the premier rugby clubs. And the opportunities for development within the club were fantastic. I mean, my 2 years coaching 5th grade there, I probably learnt a lot more than I'd learnt, since around coaching. And there was a lot of opportunities to work with guys like Anthony Eddy and Damien Hill, who's just moved into the 1st grade role there again,
right?
Where they'd be giving upskilling and giving you development opportunities, while we were going through the season. So it wasn't just right. You guys, you're the 5th grade coach, and you're 5th grade. You guys go out the back and you train there, and you sort of sight unseen for the rest of the season. There was still that interest in developing us as coaches back, even with that
cool.
lower grade side. So it was good.
Yeah, that's cool. And what about now? What's your current coaching look like? We'll get into the consultancy work, but do you have a role at the moment that you can hang your hat on, or are you moving between teams and supporting coaches more than coaching yourself?
Yeah, really good question. Currently, I've just finished off with Southern Districts in the Shoot Shield this season. We had a pretty tough season. We had a change of head coach mid-season. There was a number of players that that left the club for for various reasons. Some supported the coach that left, and some support some new players supported the new coach, and it was quite a difficult time and period for the club. And I think they're still developing or trying to build on that change at the moment. So I was basically there in a skills capacity, and ended up being like a skills and breakdown coach in the second half of the season. So I did a lot more breakdown work as well, because I think that was an area we were a bit deficient in. So I was more of a support coach with our first grade side in the Shoot Shield competition. But essentially, I'm happy in any coaching role, and following that experience, I jumped in with the Southern Districts Juniors, the under 17s, and helped out with their sevens program. So yeah, just got back from their state championships with the sevens, the under 17 sevens boys. And look, I'm happy coaching at any level. I think if I've got a couple of balls, some bibs, and some cones, and there's some kids to coach, I'm happy. So a bit like a pig in mud.
Yeah, that's kind of where I
Yeah.
am right now. I think we all go through those stages where we're super ambitious and we're always looking at the next coaching gig rather than the one we're actually in at the moment. And I've definitely been guilty of that in the past, and now I'm doing more support coaching, like you were talking about there, a little bit of coach development, but I'm also having an awesome time coaching my own kids.
Yeah.
So that's where I see my next few years is basically coaching my 5, 9, and 12-year-old, and couldn't be happier. I'm stoked for that. And if I can, keep dipping my toe in the senior rugby waters and the rep rugby stuff, then so be it. That's great. But if not, that's also fine. So yeah, I think
And
the more comfortable you are in your own coaching, the better you can be in that position and be okay with it.
yeah, and I guess that's for me. I've still got that aspirational aspect of my coaching. I'm still wanting to coach at that senior level and coach at the the highest level I can. But at the same time, I'm happy just developing at at the juniors level. Support coaching, and look, next year, I'm just waiting to see what opportunities come up. I've applied for the head coaching role there, and that's still under the, that's still being decided. So there's a few other opportunities that have sort of popped up here and there that, so I guess by the time this podcast comes out, I'll probably be a bit more aware of what I'm going to be doing.
Nice one. Awesome. Exciting. Cool. Well, if your future employers, are interested in your qualifications, they're pretty substantial. Masters in coaching, PhD level 4. From all those academic experiences, how's this shaped your coaching philosophy today? And if you were kind of to put, put it into some big rocks that you feel has kind of solidified in your overall coaching philosophy, what would they be in terms of key points or key things that any program that you run, you're going to be able to see those kind of things permeate through it?
Yeah, good question. I'll try and go through each of the different aspects, or I guess my experiences in learning, and then I'll probably summarize it with 2 or 3 of the big rocks that I think are important. And certainly these aren't set in stone, and everybody has to follow these ideas just because they're mine. But I guess everyone's got to come up with their own, their own ideas, and learn off other people and develop, off other people's ideas, and then develop their own as well. So I guess, look, first of all, my first experience was doing a Bachelor of Physical Education, and I guess that initial experience at uni just helped me develop good pedagogy, or good, developing a good learning environment, or positive learning environment, right from the outset. So it wasn't like I was going into coaching without any ideas of what I should be doing. I knew I had a structure, a session plan. I had good ideas about the way that some of the best learning, I guess, ideas and techniques that were around back then, and obviously have developed since. Then I ended up going into my master's, and with that one, my mentor, and she's actually currently still my mentor and one of my I guess supervisors, if you call it that, at Sydney University, is Professor Donna O'Connor. And I'm not sure if any of your listeners have heard of Donna, but she's an absolute coaching guru in Australia in terms of the research and just knowledge on coaching. And I guess she introduced to me research around skill acquisition. And up until my master's, I hadn't really looked into the difference between games based and skill based, and the research around relationships and connections and all of that sort of aspect of coaching, and that really interested me a great deal in terms of, wow, there's this amazing research, and games based practice is actually really good because A, B, and C, and it creates a more realistic learning environment. It creates more opportunities for decision making skills, more time on task, more enjoyment. So all of these things, I guess, I was reading more research about it, and so I guess that sort of solidified some ideas around skill acquisition. And my thesis in that degree, or that master's degree, was on skill acquisition, and fortunately my paper was published in a sports science book, and I got the opportunity to go over to Japan and present at a conference over there where there were a lot of senior coaches from around the world, and there were guys like I can't remember all these names, but there were staff from the All Blacks. There was Nick Gill, who was the strength and conditioning coach of the All Blacks. I'm not sure if he's still around at the All Blacks at the moment, but he's also done an extensive amount of research. There was the head coach at the time of Bayern Munich, the football team in Germany, and I think I'm trying to remember his name. He was a Dutch guy, so I can't remember his name. But anyway, I had the opportunity to sit down with these guys and have my lunch with them, and I ended up, as I said, went to the pub with these guys from the All Blacks, and this was a while ago, but it was just before a World Cup, so we were talking about All Blacks players and how they were going to do and stuff. And I guess that opportunity really inspired me to want to continue learning, and the opportunity to meet all these people who were brilliant coaches and brilliant researchers in their field was fantastic. And I guess that's what inspired me to go on and do my PhD. Donna sort of twisted my arm a little bit and said, "Come on, you'd go all right. You did really well in your masters. You do well in in a PhD." So yeah, look, I ended up going into that, and I guess that the main learnings I got from the PhD was the high performance environment and coaching methods to increase those high performing behaviors. And again, it really installed the importance of that unstructured play, or that unstructured coaching style. So it's not just drilling. It's not just really structured coaching sessions. Coaching can look really messy, and from an outsider, a messy training session can look terrible. It can look really unorganized, but it's actually it might actually be a really good learning environment for the players. So that's, I guess, some of the big learnings I took from the PhD, and then my level 4 with Rugby Australia. I had Michael McGrippoulis, who's been at Rugby Australia for a number of years now. Again, really easygoing, calm guy. That again, I believe that Michael tends to focus on connections and communication, and that side of things, and he again provides some great opportunity to mix with other coaches. He put on some really good opportunities to learn. So I think I got accepted into the level 4 program just before COVID, and then COVID came. So I think the whole program that Michael had set up was thrown into disarray, but he was able to manage on the run, and instead of the camp situation that we did he managed to change the structure of it so that we could do most of it online. But it ended up being, I think, the longest courses ever run, because every time we tried to meet up, COVID popped up again. So it ended up, I think, being just over 2 years in total.
Right.
But again, the opportunity to learn from other coaches and share ideas from other coaches was a really, I guess, important or exciting aspect of that program. So I guess for me, the big rocks to take away from all of those different experiences was one, and I go back to this all the time, and we talk about Ted Lasso later. It'll be brought up again, was the softer side of coaching, the relationships and the connections, and how important they really are.
Yeah.
Again, if we go back and look at research and we look at what separates great coaches from good coaches, often it tends to be that ability to relate and communicate and develop connections with athletes. And like you said, it has nothing to do with the technical and tactical ability. And often those little things are the things that bring the best out of the players. It makes, as people, we tend to feel more comfortable in an environment where, we know that we're respected. We know that we've got good relationships, and from that environment, it brings the best out of us. And I if we go back to your own experiences or my own experiences, I go back and think about when was I at my best, and it was when I was in a happy place where I had good, everything was going well in my my life in terms of relationships and all those sorts of things. And so I think that for me is a really big one. For coaches, if we can focus on relationships before results, whether it be under sixes, whether it be at World Cups, I think that's got to be a really, really big focus.
G'day coaches, I've got some great news. My online course, Evolve Rugby, is ready, and part 1 is going to be launched on October 31st, 2022. On top of that, I'll be offering a discounted price for listeners of the podcast first, before advertising the course anywhere else. I want to reward you for being such loyal listeners of the show. Check out the rugbycoachescorner.com and hit the online course tab to sign up for your discount code. I'll also put a link to the website in the show notes of this episode. 12 video modules, downloadable PDF worksheets, a reflective journal, closed Facebook community, and more is what you'll get with Evolve Rugby. I can't wait to launch this thing, so check out the website in the show notes and enjoy this episode. Cheers.
And then the other thing for me is that the variety of things that fall under the skill acquisition umbrella. And if we think about the variability of training, so having more variability in your training, so it's not just like for the beginner coaches who might be listening, if we're thinking about learning to pass, traditionally we go into passing lanes, or we might even practice passing standing still, which is awesome, and obviously there is a need for that at some point. But playing games like ball tag or something like that, where those sorts of games where we can pass the ball around, we've got defenders, we're still practicing our passing skill, but we're starting to develop some spatial awareness. We're starting to develop some decision-making skills about, okay, who's the best player for me to pass to now? Like it's not a ultra competitive environment, but it's creating enough competition or enough ability for players to, for young kids to automatically start putting skills into decision-making environments and then building on those sorts of things. So I guess that variability, that decision-making, and a word that is constantly brought up is contextual interference. So we see it in rugby a lot, where you've got a coaching session that's set out in 20 minutes of attack, 20 minutes of defense, 20 minutes of breakdown skills, or then we send our forwards off to do lineouts and our backs off to do backline moves, and it's all in these blocked sort of sessions. And the game doesn't actually look like that. There's not you don't go to play a game and do 20 minutes of defending and then 20 minutes of attacking. It's interspersed. You've got, you might attack for 3 phases, then defend for 4 phases, then you might get the ball back and attack for 1 phase, and then there might be a line out. So you've got, one line out for, which might take 30 seconds or whatever a line out takes. And then you've got a scrum, but you're never going to have 20 minutes of scrummaging. And as much as a lot of front rowers would love to have that, it's not going to happen. So it's important to add that ability or that contextual interference, which looks at randomizing some practice. And we probably do that a lot more in our team runs and our opposed runs. But I think there's probably more opportunity to do that. And one of the things that I think could be improved is, when we do our units, we don't need to spend 10 minutes working on backline plays. Maybe intersperse. All right, we're going to do a counter-attack drill, followed by, we're going to now attack from, let's say, a 15-meter, a scrum 15 meters from the sideline, 20 meters out from the try line. So what are our options here? So we're going to still practice those, but it's not in a block of practice. It's just mixing them up and randomizing them. And what the research shows, or the learning research shows, and this is not just sport, this is music, this is what's called chess. This is a heap of different things. Learning a lines for a play, for example, is that if you randomize your learning and you practice a variety of different things, when you're practicing it, you're going to make more mistakes. But the fact is that when you go from from one task to another task, your brain needs to re-engage in that new task, and that re-engagement is where the learning takes place. It's okay, I did this 10 minutes ago. Now I've got to think about it again. So what are the main concepts of this line out, or what does my footwork need to look like in this line out? Now that they might make mistakes, but they're thinking about it. Whereas if we practice something for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes in a row, often the first couple of minutes requires a lot of thought processing. We need to, we need to think about it, but then following that, it tends to become almost automatic, and we're not thinking about it. So by going from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and then going back to that other one that we might have started off on, we've got to rethink about it. We've got to re-engage with our thought processes around that. And that's where our brain actually puts that learning down or embeds it. So I think, I think soccer or football does it really, really well. But I think that's where rugby could potentially do a lot more randomized practice. And a lot of coaches do it, but it's something that I think across the board we could probably see more of, and less structure and more, unstructured randomized practice.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. There's some great advice and great tips there for coaches for sure. And what about your research that you've been involved in, a number of publications? The most recent one I'm pretty interested in is it was titled "The Practice Environment: How Coaches May Promote Athlete Learning." What did you and your colleagues do in terms of writing that short review and putting together the data, and what were some of the big takeaways from that piece?
So basically, some of my colleagues, Dr. Paul Larkin and again Professor Donna O'Connor, will probably played a big part in this, and I was sort of just rode on their coattails a little bit. But I guess for us, essentially, we looked at a heap of literature on coaching behaviors and coaching structures, and we, I guess, summarized it into a small chapter or a small paper that provided a bit of a commentary or a summary on what the current practices that are being utilized by coaches, and what is most common, and then compared that to, I guess, what literature is saying is more effective in coaching. Right. So, so it's basically like looking at what's happening over a period of, say, 15, 20 years, how it's changed, and what research suggests, and how it compares to that over those periods of years.
Right. And what were some of the big takeaways, I suppose, early on in that time piece? It would have been very top down, coach led, coach heavy, and perhaps a slow development to a more player centered kind of environment.
Yeah, 100%. So basically, what a lot of the research suggests is that coaches are becoming a lot more aware of these, what we refer to as the good practices that promote the athlete-centered environments. But the problem is, even though that we're developing more awareness, when the coaches go into their training sessions, they still tend to revert back to traditional coach-centered methods.
Right.
So, we're seeing more awareness and we're seeing more education around this is what, I say good coaching, but what research suggests good coaching looks like. And then what coaches are actually doing, while it is improving, it's not improving at the same rate as the awareness, if that makes sense. We see the training form versus the playing form. So again, that we know that there's teaching games for understanding or game-based coaching has a lot of positive benefits. And over those last 15, 20 years, we can see that there's been a lot more game-based approaches being utilized. But still, we see at junior sport that there's still a lot more of that training form. So they're still doing a lot more drilling. We're seeing that, there's kids lining up in queues, waiting for turns. So in those scenarios, those sorts of kids are I might say wasting time, but they're not. It's time that they're not on task, and we could be increasing time on task. While we're seeing at the development level and the more senior levels, we're seeing a lot more playing form being utilised. We're also seeing an increase in inactivity rates. So, we're looking at in some studies where inactivity, where the coach is talking and the players are listening, it's close to 30% of the training session, which is a really, it's 1/3 of the training session. Athletes are not practicing and they're listening to the coach. And one of the biggest issues.
At what level was that? Sorry.
So that's at that development level, that elite junior level. So that 16 to 18 sort of academy type age groups. And again, in that situation, we hear a lot of coaches talking about we don't have time to get through all of the things that we need to get through. But there's we're spending 30% right there. 30% of time explaining or instructing or giving feedback. Now, obviously, we need to spend time giving feedback, explaining. It's just trying to look at more effective ways we can do it, how we can be really concise. And I spoke to a guy called Dave Diggle, who put it in a really, really good way. He talked about we've got the machine gunner coaches, and then we've got the sniper coaches. And the machine gunners will rattle off a heap of information.
Oh, I like
but
it.
The snipers, they'll hit their target with with one or two words, and then they can go and practice. And that's what we need to learn to be. We need to learn to be the snipers rather than machine gunners. So I really love that analogy from Dave Diggle.
So that's
a
good coaching technique too, using analogies.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got to look at those rates of inactivity. The other thing is, we've looked at the instruction style and as coaches, we've started to understand and utilize more questioning, and questioning has become a lot more common in our coaching over the last 15, 20 years. And in some cases, questioning becomes the main source of communication, which is great. But I guess we also have to understand that questioning is not the only thing that can be utilized. And when we do use questions, we need to be aware that when we ask questions, are we asking them for a specific reason? Are we asking a convergent question which gives a specific answer? So for an example of a convergent question might be, where should your eyes look when you pass the ball? So we know that there's a specific answer. And if they already know the answer to that question, asking them that question again it's not getting them to learn anything. It's just basically getting them to reproduce information they already know. So when we're asking questions, we want to try and ask questions that might not be specifically easy to answer, or it's not just reproducing information they already know. And the other thing is, coaches could potentially use a lot more divergent questioning, which presents a lot more options. And a good example of a divergent question might be looking at doing your analysis or a video, or stopping your training session in the middle of a game and getting everyone to pause and looking at asking the question, all right, what options present themselves in this scenario? And then getting that, in this scenario, there might be players that say, oh, a crossfield kick, a grubber kick, there's a space here, I should just go, run myself. Or, if I go left, there's 4 defenders, but if I go right, it's going to create a 2-on-1. Or, it's just getting them to come up with a whole heap of answers, and not one of them might not be right. It's not like there's not one specific correct answer, but it's just getting them to, I guess, survey or the environment and understand that there are multiple options, and then come up with which one might be the best one to use in this case. So yeah, it's just about getting coaches to understand that questioning is important. We know that questioning is important, but we've got to make sure we're asking the right questions. We're not just asking questions for the sake of it. Yeah. And when we're asking questions, a lot of the time we need the players to then go back and practice what they responded, the answers to those questions. So, and I'm guilty of this. At the end of a session, we ask questions to, conclude our training session. We'll say, okay, what have we got to do in this scenario? What have we got to do in that scenario? Blah, blah, blah. And then we don't go back and practice it. Yeah. Whereas, what the whole point of asking those questions and to get them to think about is, okay, now let's go and practice it. So trying to ask those questions at the right time and then get them to then practice it. So then go and put their answers into action.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if there was one area that I would like to improve on, it is exactly that. I'll catch myself occasionally asking question after question, and then I'll be like, okay, where am I going with this? And exactly to your point, we know we're meant to be asking questions, but those questions need to be targeted and pointed and not always have a right or wrong answer. There are many ways to skin a cat. So
yeah. And one of the conclusions to that paper was around when you're developing your session plans, think of some questions, think of some divergent questions that are highly likely to come up in your practice. So, there might be questions around, scrum shape or something. You're the forwards coach and you're doing some scrum work, and a question might be around, all right, what body shape worked best for you when your opposition tight head was boring in on you? I don't know, something along those lines. And it gets the player to think about, okay, well, if I sort of change my shoulder angle, or if I bring change my foot stance, I don't know, I'm not a front rower, so I'm not going to pretend I know the answer to that one. But just get them to think, come up with the answers, get them to think about it more in depth, and then when they go into it again and their next scrum or their next opportunity to practice that activity, they then think, all right, so I'm going to try and do this with my shoulder. I'm going to, do this with my, square my hips a bit more. I'm going to think about doing this with my feet and see if I get a better outcome. If I don't, then that answer is probably not correct. Then I've got to think about adjusting it again. And a lot of the time it comes down to the athletes coming up with the answer themselves and developing that answer intrinsically, rather than the coach specifically saying, all right, make sure your feet are this wide apart, hips, the hips should be at this angle, and your shoulders should be doing this or whatever. It just gets the athlete to have that, I guess, that intrinsic opportunity to develop or come up with the answer themselves.
Yeah, that's going to stick, or more likely to stick.
Yeah.
Cool.
Look,
go.
I was just going to say, like, I guess that's not something that, for coaches that are listening, that it's not something they have to do all the time. There's still going to be times where you're going to instruct, or you're going to, give
For
direct
sure.
instructions
We've got a coach,
around. Okay, we've got to coach but I guess it's trying to find those learning opportunities where they can, the players could potentially come up with some of those answers. So I guess, so it's not like a one size fits all model. You don't have to question all the time, or, there's definitely time direct, like for that instruction where you say, okay, I want you to get your hands up early. I want you to, whatever it might be. Those things are also important in coaching, but it's the, the way or when we use things is, I guess, the important aspect.
Cool. Well, looking at the other articles you've published, you've done a bunch on men's and women's sevens. So you're obviously a huge fan of the game of sevens. Me, not so much, but we're going to cover it anyhow. We'll cover it anyhow on the show. But I'm gonna give you, let's say, 2-3 minutes on this one, and then we'll move back to 15s.
Yeah.
Based on your research, and you've got like 6 or 7 papers there on looking at the game and breaking it down and analyzing it, and what are the key moments in sevens games, and how a team's winning and at the highest level. Often when we're coaching sevens, we've got a very limited amount of time with the players. We might have 4 sessions, and then we're off to a tournament or 2. If you were to advise a coach who's leading a sevens program and has very limited time with their athletes, what would you be encouraging them to look at more about the on-field stuff rather than the off-field and the coaching behavior stuff, more on the
It's
technical, tactical now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me this one, because I've just been in this experience myself, just having under 17s boys. I think we got them for 5 weeks, but most players only attended 4 sessions for school holidays and all those sorts of things. But so basically, with these group of players, I was able to do most of it using a game-based approach.
Yep.
And the 4 things that I think that I wanted to focus on, first and foremost, was unstructured play. So the ability to play from turnovers, the ability to play from rucks at any specific part of the field. That was first and foremost the most important thing. Sevens is such a messy game, and part of my research identified that there's no way that you can say that one event's going to lead to another event. It's so unstructured that there's almost no predictability in the game. So that ability to play from turnovers, the ability to transition from attack to defense, and vice versa, is ultra important. So the best way for I believe to do that is through gameplay. Just get the 7-on-7 and just play. Another really important skill, important aspect to the game, is evasion. So evasive skills for me, and from the research, was one of the main aspects that separated strong teams from weaker teams. And
right,
if you look at some of the best teams, back when I was looking at it, you had New Zealand and Fiji, and you look at the ability of some of those guys sidestepping, their agility was amazing, and developing evasive skills is hard in 4 weeks. But I guess the important thing is making sure players are aware that you have the space to take players on in a one-on-one environment. The defense isn't as compact as it is in 15, so you're going to get a lot of one-on-one situations. So if you're an agile, fast, evasive person, use that as your strength. That's got to be something we build our game around, is your evasive skills.
Yeah.
Another thing that I looked at was in sevens. Again, it's very unstructured, but if you want to add some structure, there's only 3 variations in the game. So every ruck, you're generally going to have the player who's tackled, you're going to have a player who's cleaning out, and then you're going to have a halfback. So you've got 3 of your players involved at the ruck. Then you're going to have 4 left over. Now, depending where the ruck is, if it's in the middle of the field, you're generally going to have 2 each side. So I'd call that a 2 and 2. If it's a really wide ruck that happens near the sideline, you're going to have predominantly your 4 players on one side of the ruck and none on the other. So you'd call that a 4 and none. And if it's sort of somewhere in between that, like around the 15-meter line, you might have a 3 players on one side and 1 player on the blind, so a 3 and 1. So getting the players to identify those 3 scenarios as being the most common attacking opportunities, and how or what sort of ways we can manipulate defense in those 3 scenarios. So from a 4 on none, generally that's the easiest one to defend against, and you'll see defenses rushing up a lot quicker. But if you get a 2 and 2 in the middle, it's a really good opportunity for the halfback to scoot, try and engage that first defender off each side of the ruck. And if you can engage that guy, then all of a sudden you create the 2 on 1. So just being aware of those 3 different scenarios on the field, and how to utilize them, in best in each scenario. And then the other one, and this is where my team got beaten on the weekend, was the breakdown support. It's breakdown is so important in sevens, like it is in 15s. But you if you're not supporting that play, it's going into contact, and you're not there over the ball like that, it's likely to be a turnover. So breakdown support is vital. And I guess if I go back to the last 5 weeks that I was with these under 17s kids, it's probably the one area I didn't spend enough time focusing on. The other things where we focused on and we did really well. We scored lots of points, but in our semi-final, we got turned over a lot by one of the opposition teams, and that led to our demise being beaten at the breakdown. So I'd say those 4 things would be my main priority.
That's great. That's awesome. Makes me want to coach sevens. So you did a great job. No, I love coaching sevens. It's great especially for high school kids. Like it's they love it, and there's so much energy around the game. So I do enjoy it. But 15s is my true love. Anyhow, moving on. Let's talk about the Coach Doctor, your consultancy business that you're running now. Can you tell me a bit about how that got started and what the kind of day-to-day looks like in terms of the business model and some of the cool experiences you've had so far with it?
Yeah, mate. This I do this on the side for full time. I'm at City Uni at the moment. As I think the official title is academic, but I don't know if I like think of myself as an academic. I'm a rugby coach that likes to read and do a bit of research from time to time. Nice. So basically I started this again. I was down at a sports science conference down in Melbourne. Actually, it was the World Congress of Science and Football I think it was hosted by Victoria University or one of the universities down there. And I attended a movement variation workshop with a Portuguese football coach, and the way he coached the game of football in terms of soccer, it really opened up my eyes into some really different ways of approaching basically football. But a lot of these things could be adapted to any sport. And he showed a video of a famous soccer player. Now I can't remember his name, but it was a video of this soccer player who had some fantastic skills. He had the different moves, and basically the question was, how did you learn these moves? And this famous soccer player learnt these moves in a children's playground, so playing around with a soccer ball in a playground. He learnt to flick the ball over the swing set and dribble and change direction. Basically, so the way he developed a coaching program was to almost utilize a lot of these skills in a similar environment. So starting to throw a heap of different constraints into a coaching environment. So if we think about looking at, how can we do that in rugby? Let's say we're going to throw 15 hoops onto the training paddock, and when we're playing, we aren't allowed to step in a hoop at all. We've got to make sure that we're missing those hoops. So all of a sudden, it makes us more aware that we've got to have our eyes up. Look, we've got, we're doing an opposed session. We've got 15 players that we're playing against, but then we've also got these hoops. So the space is going to be even less than what it might be in a real game, because they're defending the spaces between the hoops. So what have we got to do as a team to unpack this defense to create some space around that? So essentially, we're making the game harder than it would be in real life. And so I attended this workshop, and I was gobsmacked by it. I thought it was fantastic. And then a couple of weeks later, I was watching NRL 360, and this was back when Benji Marshall was still playing, and I think he was at the Tigers or the Dragons. I can't remember at the time, but Benji Marshall was talking about wanting to, their team that he played in had been training harder than they play. And then a lot of people ask us about what does it mean to train harder than we play? Well, traditionally it means we're going to do more conditioning, so we're going to be better conditioned than when we play. So, in a game of footy, when we're under fatigue, our our training session during the week or in the preseason has prepared us for this fatigue, and we're actually now feeling comfortable to be this fatigued. If we wanted to think about how we can do this from a skills perspective, we can put players in environments where they're going to do more tackles per minute or throw more passes per minute than they would in a game scenario. So they're practicing more times per minute. So that's increasing that's making their skill level, their repetition higher than it would be in a game. So you can effectively do this quite easily with skills and with conditioning. But then I guess from thinking about it from a decision-making perspective, how can we make the game harder? So again, some ideas like throwing the hoops down on the field. So scattering hoops all over the park or over the field, and you've got to now break down the defense, but you can't step in a hoop, otherwise it's a turnover. All of a sudden makes the game a lot harder than it actually is to play, because you're not just playing against 15 guys or 15 girls, you're now playing against 15 plus these spaces aren't available to go into. So we've got to work harder to unpack or unpack that defensive line, and we've got to try and come up with some think outside the square of how we might be able to get through here. So that's just one example. So I guess, so basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to come up with opportunities to help coaches come up with ideas where we can make the game or we can improve or increase decision-making aspects in training through constraints, like overloading defenders. We're traditionally in rugby, we do a 15 versus 12, or we often do a 3 versus 2 or a 4v3 or a 2v1s. Well, in the game, we're going to be confronted with situations where there's going to be 5 defenders, 2 or 3 attackers. So let's start to think about what we do in these scenarios. All right. So let's start to say, right, we've got a 3v5, like 3 attackers versus 5 defenders. All right. This is going to be a lot harder to unpack than a 3 versus 2. So what are we going to do now in this scenario? What are some ways that we can break this defense down? What are some strategies we can use here? So I guess it's just getting coaches to think outside the square in terms of, don't just think about rugby from a point of view that we've got an advantage position here, because we tend to train rugby in an advantageous way a lot more than we coach rugby from a disadvantaged perspective. So by saying that, we tend to coach 15 on whoever's left over, they're going to go defense. So we might have 10 defenders. Well, hold on, we've got 25 in the squad. Let's go 15 defenders, 10 attackers in our team run. Yeah. Or let's start preparing for a yellow card or a red card. Or these days they're getting handed out quite easily. Let's prepare for a double yellow card. Let's go 13 on 15. All right, what are we going to do in this scenario when our 10's off? Who's going to start to control the game? Who's going to start to think about, who's going to steer the game in that scenario? Who's going to, our hookers off, for example. What do we do with our line out now? All right, what are some strategies to make us strong in the line out without our line out going to crap because our hookers off or our main jump or our line out caller's off. So I guess just trying to develop or add constraints into our coaching sessions that are going to increase these opportunities to make decisions in difficult circumstances. Yeah. So that's, I guess, what the business looks at doing. There's also an arm, like a leadership arm, where a friend of mine, Gina Haddad, who's also done her PhD around leadership groups in sport. So she does consultancy around leadership, and then another colleague, Sean Irvine, does a lot of team effectiveness or team building type consultancy. So so that's what we're sort of looking at the moment. We've got a skill acquisition arm, then we've got our leadership and our team effectiveness sort of arms of the business.
Oh, awesome! No, it sounds great, and definitely I'll put the links to your website in the show notes, as well as some of the articles we talked about earlier as well. And I'd also recommend listeners just to look you up on LinkedIn, because a lot of your articles are on your LinkedIn page as well. That they can go and check those out as well. All right, and you got yourself a podcast as well, as titled the Coach Doctor Podcast. What's that experience been like in terms of your own personal growth from a coach, and opening up rabbit's holes that you didn't think you were going to crawl down, but you end up spending hours on later?
Yeah, Andy, it's funny you asked, because up until COVID, I'd never really listened to podcasts before, and when we were locked down, and usually I'm talking to people and meeting people and talking about coaching, I didn't have that as much. So, funnily enough, one of the first rugby or coaching podcasts I listened to was yours. So thank you first of all for opening my eyes around coaching. And
awesome. Stoked.
So that was so I guess that was my introduction to podcasts, and I really enjoyed listening to a lot of your podcasts back in through that period. And I guess I had a lot more time on my hands at that time as well. So I thought, I'm going to start up my own podcast. And it took me a while. I only started, I think, midway through last year, around August or so, about this time last year. When again we were under lockdown for, I think, the second time, or the main time in Sydney. And that's when I sort of got it up and running. And I really wanted it to be about learning from different coaching perspectives, not just the technical, tactical aspects. Talking to some women who are in coaching, I guess a male-dominated space. Aspects around leadership, aspects around mind coaching, aspects around the sports science, strength and conditioning. So it's not specifically about rugby. There's unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, most of my contacts are in rugby. So there is definitely a big rugby. I'd say 75% of the interviews are rugby related. But I guess it's more to look around coaching effectiveness and different coaching models and different coaching strategies that cover a range of aspects that are involved in teams. So that's, I guess, the way I got into it. So so again, you're partly to I don't know if I say blame or partly to thank for that. But what are some big learnings? I guess look, like you, mate, you probably learn something from every interview you do, and you speak to people with so many diverse ideas and thoughts and opinions. And I think it's great, because you're almost learning something new every interview, and I guess you're building your own abilities and your own ideas, and you're developing yourself as a coach. It's a great development tool.
Oh, for sure. And I think, like, because I'll basically, it's almost like I do the each episode 4 times, like thinking about the questions I'm going to ask, then actually doing the interview, then editing it, and then I'll listen to the show as well. So I'll go through this process and I'll find little bits. It's kind of like, watching a movie, and you watch it a second time, you're like, oh, I didn't notice that the first time.
100%.
So I get a huge amount out of it. It's crazy, the amount of development just from my own coaching, and even parenting as well. Just from going through the process of having a podcast, it's been the best coach development I've ever gone through, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's great. I've really enjoyed it, and the thing that I hope is that it gives opportunities for other people to learn something as well. And we can learn every day of our lives until we finish breathing. So there's nothing to stop us from learning. We've got to keep going.
No, 100%. All right. Well, the part I've been really hanging out for is Ted Lasso chat. The reason why I got you on the podcast was you put up a really cool post about the show Ted Lasso, and how you felt it was a great advertisement for high quality coaching. And I watched the first season, maybe the second season, I can't remember, but I haven't watched it all. I'm definitely gonna binge it later on. But I loved it, and I saw some really cool things from a coaching point of view as well. So it was really cool to see that articulated in your post. You came up with 10 points, but what were some of the big ones for you in that great show?
Yeah, I guess just before I talk about it, I think that was the first series. I've since gone and watched the second series, and it sort of I guess changed direction a little bit, but there was still, I think, still some great learnings. But I guess from that first series, I expected to watch a comedy, a satirical sort of show about an American coach coaching Premier League soccer and it was just all fun and laughs, and he was just going to do a horrendous job, but somehow be successful. So I didn't expect to watch it and think, wow, there's some actually really good. If we think about good coaching, he's doing some amazing things here, and I don't know if the producers or the people who wrote the series intended for that to happen, or it just happened by mistake. But I guess the 10 things, I've just written them down. I've got them here. I think the first one that I mentioned was trusting staff to add value. So in the series, he entrusts his Nathan, who's the gear steward, and basically nobody knows his name and nobody pays him any attention. But he makes him feel valued, and he listens to his ideas, and automatically he's got this extra voice that helps him through coaching, and who helps. I guess it's just another person. He shows trust, and he adds, and he values that person, which is it's important in any environment, really, isn't it? It's such an important aspect to make people feel welcome, to make people feel valued. So I thought that was a really important one. One of the things I noticed is he just wants to be a good person all the time, and he wants to learn the names of the whole organization. And he goes in saying, part of being a successful team is having a connected organization, and he takes cookies every day for the boss of the football club, and and the backstory behind it is she actually wants him to fail because she wants to wants the club to go under to upset her ex-husband. But he's just so nice and so such a warm, generous person. It actually backfires, and she ends up in tears, apologizing to him, saying that he's such a good person. Yeah, sorry. Hopefully I haven't just ruined that for them. But he wants to know the names of the gear stewards, the people who put the lines on the field, basically everybody in the organization. He wants them to feel valued. The second team or the reserve team players. And I guess, as I mentioned, they're trying to bring the owner in as part of the team. He invites her down to the dressing rooms. He wants, the board. And often we hear about these professional sports teams where there's dysfunction in the board, and there's, a difference in the board and the actual playing team. And, he wants to have everyone connected. And so he wants to bring the board into the dressing room, and he wants them to I guess, support the team, and they want, work together as a whole organization. One of the things, and I talked about it before with one of my old school teachers, Mr. Ferrugia, was giving the players autonomy and being able to trust the players. And, a lot of the time he doesn't tell a player that, they've got to do something. He says, what do you reckon would be best for the team in this scenario? So, I'm trying to remember back. I don't know if I've got all the things, all my facts correct, but he asks one of the characters is Roy Kent. Roy Kent's towards the end of his career, and he's like, I'm not going to. What do you think's best for the team, Roy? Everybody's saying you're too old now. I think you're a great leader. I think this. I think that. But what do you think's best for the team? And he gives the players, that chance to make the decisions rather than I'm the sole decision maker of the group. Connecting with the playing group, he finds out everything that makes them tick. He wants to try and make it fun. And I remember the one example of this. You have the player from Nigeria, Sam Ubisono, I think his name is, who he's upset because he's missing his family, and then he goes and finds out when his birthday is, and straight after the game he brings in the birthday cake and everybody sings happy birthday, and just that little thing makes this character really happy and feel more valued and part of the group, and like the team becomes his family, and that sort of ends up spurring this character to be one of the great people within the team, and it excels as that character's performance on the field. Again, using the players as a resource when he talks about the chaos tactics when they're about to play Manchester City, which is a really, really important game for the team. I won't spoil it by telling you the result. But he goes into the dressing room and he goes, right, we're playing the best team in the comp. This is, they've got all the best players and they're top of the Premier League. And he says, what are the best things that, and I think the players all come up with, we tried this when I was in the, when I was in the under-15s, this tactic worked really well. And he gets a whole heap of tactics and he puts them all together and he goes, right, we're going to go with this strategy. So he uses the playing group as a resource. It's not just, again, all about his ideas and his thoughts. One of them, which we talked about before, is teaching through analogies. Now, I can't remember the exact example, but he often uses analogies just in his day-to-day conversation.
Yeah.
And it's really witty. And I'm like, there's often times I'm like, I can use that. That's awesome. So a lot of analogies, and again, analogies are great ways to communicate because they're a good way for players to recall information.
It's a shortcut.
So it's a shortcut. It's like if we say when you pass the ball, we're thinking about for under sixes or under little kids, think of an elephant's trunk going across its body. If they think elephant's trunk, it means more to them than early catch, transfer the ball, release the ball out here. So he uses a lot of analogies, which is great. The communication is open and honest. He doesn't skirt around the edges and not address difficult scenarios.
Yeah, it's good.
And he has these open communications, and sometimes the players don't react. And he says, all right, well, we've had this conversation. This is what the playing group thinks of you for, what you're like as a person. This is, you think this of yourself as a person. Have a think about how other people perceive you, and is the way you think of yourself, the correct way to act as a person. Another thing, he's a storyteller. He goes into these funny stories, which are often, from an outsider, you're watching it, you think, what's this story got to do with football or whatever? But, I've been in so many coaching development sessions where, the theme has been be a good storyteller. Be able to, one of the great things about the Pacific culture is they tell stories within their culture, and these stories go, down through the cultures. And just like any culture or any family, we want to develop our own stories, and we want them to pass down through our team, from year to year. Oh, remember this, when we did this was a fantastic, So being a good storyteller is also, I think, really, really important. And the other thing is he always has the players' backs in tough scenarios or tough situations. Like, again, players are injured or players are upset. He'll just go to them and support them, no matter what. If it's if they've done the wrong thing, if they've done, if they've mucked up and caused the team to lose, he'll make sure they're the first player he goes to, and he has their back. You know what? We lost the game. That decision that you made, while it wasn't what didn't work at that moment in time, it wasn't the outcome. It didn't create the outcome of the match. It was just one decision throughout a whole match. So don't make it all about, don't beat yourself up over the, something that you've done in the game or something you've done outside of the game. So that was one of the 10 things that I thought were really, really great. And I've really enjoyed it. And you know what, there were times where I'd watch that series. I'm not joking. I'd get emotional. I'd be crying. I'd watch it. I'd be like, awesome. I tear up fairly easily. I'd tear up watching kids' movies. So, there are times where I'd be crying, times where I'd be laughing, times where I'd be going, wow, this is like really good information, and coaches have got to watch this. So, I guess that was my cool. Thoughts on Ted Lasso.
Awesome. Love it. Mandatory viewing for all coaches, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, I love it, and it's a great way to wrap things up for the podcast. But we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. when you were a kid growing up in Sydney. Question one: Who was one of those first players that really got you into the game and made you really fall in love with rugby?
I should say Tim Gavin, as I played
Yeah.
for East as a young fella.
Yeah.
And I guess he was my idol because I'd see him at training. I'd see him walking around before the senior team started. But I'd have to admit, I've always had a bit of a man crush on Zinzan Brook. So I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Solid. Yeah. Nah.
Say I've
For sure.
always looked up to an All Black as an Aussie. So
Yeah.
I've loved
Well,
watching Zinzan.
I named my wife and I named our third child Jonah after Jonah Lomu. So I'm in
Nice.
the same boat. So there you go. Okay, what about now? Who are some of the players you like watching go around?
I'm going to say Charlotte Caslick and Shani Williams, who are both in the Australian sevens team. I think Charlotte's just a phenomenal athlete, and I reckon you could put her in AFLW, NRLW,
anything,
or the Matildas, and she'd just kill it. She'd be awesome. Shani, on the other hand, a little bit like probably not as influential as a player, but maybe I'm incorrect in saying that, but I guess as a worker, her attitude just seems to put her team first all the time, and she just seems like an all-round top person and a player I guess you'd want to play alongside of.
Yeah, two great choices for sure. What about coaches? Who's third question? Who's a high-profile coach that you like what they're doing and respect how they go about things?
I'm going to have a couple again, and I'm going to say Daryl Gibson.
Yep.
And Daryl Gibson probably isn't coaching a lot at the moment, but I interviewed Daryl on my podcast just after after he left the Waratahs, and Daryl did the Masters of Coaching course, and I actually ended up teaching him in that degree. And I was a bit worried, like, how am I going to coach a Super Rugby coach or teach a Super Rugby coach? But after he finished that, his dissertation was called "Leading While Losing," and he basically came out and he basically owned it and said, you know what, these are the things I got wrong, and these are the lessons I learned. And it's pretty hard as a coach to go and talk about. It's easy to talk about success. It's really hard to unpack what didn't work and I guess talk about what didn't go right,
especially when it's so public as well.
Yeah. So I guess another one for me is Brian Ashton. I got to meet Brian a couple of years ago, and again, such an open, genuine bloke who's happy to talk, happy to get in contact, at any stage, so open to sharing his ideas and philosophies. And I think a lot of our ideas and philosophies are very similar. But again, just a genuine good bloke.
Yeah, and they've stood the test of time as well. From 20, 30 years ago to now. So exactly.
So
cool.
I hope Daryl gets back into coaching. I think he's still involved with Fiji, but I hope he does well again. So he's a guy that thinks very deeply about it and wants to be successful, and definitely I think from my perspective, seems like he wants to put the team first a lot.
Yeah. Well, it sounds a little bit like a Stuart Lancaster kind of scenario as well. So lessons to be learned there for sure. Cool. And final question: who's someone in your community who's involved in the grassroots that deserves some recognition for the work they do?
Mate, I'm going to give a shout out to a coach called Greg Lee. He's a coach that I only met about 2 years ago. Ultra passionate guy. He coaches at the community level. He's always trying to learn, trying to develop, and become a better coach. He's not happy to just sort of sit on what he knows. He wants to learn. We often sit on the phone for hours and talk about coaching, and it doesn't seem to get boring. He's just one of those guys. We can just chat for ages about it. And fortunately for him, his side, he took on a new team this year and coached them, the Newport Breakers in the subbies comp, and they won their comp this season. So big shout out to him for doing such a good job there.
Awesome. Great way to wrap things up. All right, James. Well, it's been awesome chatting to you about all things rugby and a little bit of Ted Lasso in there for good measure. Thanks for giving up your time. It's great to hear your input, and I think coaches are going to get a huge amount out of it. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Mate, Andy, a pleasure. And again, I've appreciated your podcast, and I've learned a lot off your podcast over the last couple of years. So I appreciate what you're doing to help coaching and grow rugby.
Mate, thanks a lot. Awesome. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.